Andrew, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks, James. It's great to be here.
Yeah, likewise. I'm excited for this conversation because you have some pretty interesting concepts around coaching. So, you've built a leadership coaching business around the concept of self-coaching. What inspired that philosophy and why is it especially relevant now?
Great question. We've got COVID to thank for this. So I set up my business in 2017 as a coach. I was coaching chief executives and leaders. And during COVID, even though I continued that online, because of the conditions we were all under, a lot of my clients were saying to me, Andrew, I really enjoyed coming into the session, 2 hours with you, it's fine. But I think because it was online as well, it didn't have the physical presence, so there was something maybe missing. And they just asked me, before we meet again in a month's time, how can I really embed some of these things I'm learning and how can I lead myself more effectively? And I'd never really thought about that question. I just sort of thought they did it. And hence the self-coaching was born in that sense. There was a bit of research around it at that time, academia, but not a lot that was really pragmatic and relatable to leaders. So I decided to write a book, as you do, in 2021 when during COVID, and it was released then. And then since then, the whole business has grown around that.
Yeah, interesting. Interesting. Yeah, so you wrote a book and then makes sense. And then so how did the journey go with the business? Because, you've got an interesting model where you've brought on partners as well to sort of help facilitate and scale and different partners of, for different reasons. How does that work and how does the kind of the model work and what does that look like?
Yeah, well, I decided, and I'm sure some people can relate to this, when I was in my previous role as a board director working in the executive search industry, one of the things I didn't really enjoy was managing people and teams. Okay, I could do it, but I didn't really enjoy it. So one of the things I decided when I set up my own business in 2017 was that I wanted to create a partnership of equals where if services that my client needed couldn't be provided by me, they could be provided by somebody else in my network, whether that be another coach like me who coached differently, a headhunter, somebody who actually provided assessment type services, somebody who provided training services. So if I got the client and the CEO and the CHRO working with me and recognizing there were all these other resources around, a lot of them were starting to prefer that rather than going to a large corporate who provided all those services because they had more agility, more flexibility. And it's just grown since then. We'll come on later to how challenging that's been. But that was the original premise. I didn't want to necessarily have a team and build an empire. It was about the network and community that I was building who basically felt the same way as me about service to clients and also shared the same values.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And yeah, I mean, I'm right there with you when it comes to building a team. It's like two sides to building a company is the growth side, growth bringing clients on, and the other side is obviously delivery. But then it's the team side, and I really like that philosophy of building the network, building those relationships. And you've actually said, so when it comes to technology, so AI right now is obviously booming. Everybody's talking about it. But you said, the only thing AI won't replicate is the quality of relationships. So I guess that feeds into your philosophy as well. How's that? How's that shaping, the future of leadership? That whole relationships piece.
Well, it is, and there's a really interesting topic. We could speak a whole other summer, but I'll summarize. So, what I tend to find, because I host a podcast, as you know, around successful leaders that have had trauma in their lives, and lots of really successful leaders are driven by the stuff that's happened to them in the past they're almost running away from. And it enables them to be really, really good at what they do because they're focused, they have very little emotion sometimes, they're decisive, they don't mind going away from home for weeks on end, traveling. So there's something about leaders that go into these positions, which is almost like a superpower type thing they have. But the downside to that is they don't always necessarily have high quality relationships. And because of what's happened to them in the past, they don't always want to be in those relationships. So when the point I made to you when we last spoke, and what I make regularly is, if AI is going to replicate all of the tasks and processes and systems out there to be best in class for any organization, all we have left is the relationships between the people that are employed by it. And that's where a lot of leaders almost need to unlearn what it is they've learned about being successful as a leader and start from base zero about what are my relationships looking like right now and how can I invest in them. And that's where AI can support us in terms of reflection, but we've got to do the hard work in terms of how we show up in relationships. And as you say, that's where most of my work is when I'm working with leaders.
Yeah. And it's an important message, and I think I do think most people agree in that sense that it's not getting away from that human-centric perspective when it comes to people and relationships. Technology is incredible, AI is amazing. It's so good for well, a whole horde of different use cases, but it does come back to that. It's almost becoming more and more of a need as we move more and more into technology, that the human element, the human piece, that heart-centered relationship piece for sure. So it is a powerful message. It's really interesting. You mentioned, so obviously on your podcast, you're talking to leaders around the awareness when it comes to childhood trauma, and how self-aware are they of that before they start doing work with you?
It's a really, really interesting experience that we have. So what I would tend to say is that leaders fall into two categories. I'll answer the question this way. The first type of leader, and there's nothing wrong with these leaders, I'm just explaining, they're not really aware that they are the problem in terms of their leadership. So what they tend to do is project and say, my team's not good enough, or my investors don't understand me, or the market's gone down. So they're projecting and blaming other people, okay, but they're really good at what they do. And they're not necessarily going to respond well to any coach, because as far as they're concerned, it's not them. And then you have the coach, the CEOs, the leaders, who basically are thinking, is it me? There's a few patterns here. I replaced the chief financial officer 3 times, and I'm still not getting what I need from the finance director. So there's this little thing there about, so they're curious, and they may go see someone like me as a coach. So the first thing that they always recognize once they've spent 2 hours with me is that the only reason they're not succeeding in life, usually personally more than professionally, because a lot of them are very successful professionally, is because they're getting in their own way, particularly how they show it in relationships. And once they really get that, and I can give examples, then they're into it and they're off, because they know then that if they are the problem, they're also the solution. And that's where all the deep work is. So that's usually the first recognition. They go, yeah, it is me, isn't it? You got me. But that's very hard if the ego is kicking in, which it does with a lot of leaders, about the path. Well, I've got here to this particular role now, so how can it be possibly me?
Yeah, very fascinating. So the first type that you mentioned, do you just kind of, they're not ready to receive that message? Yeah.
They wouldn't even speak to me normally. And again, what's really interesting is you get some more senior board directors or chief executives saying, oh, Joe, Jemima, they could actually do with a coach because we really need them to get better. And then it's being done to them. And that doesn't work either. So you've got to recognize I need it and the support, and recognize that I can't do it on my own because it's really hard work.
Yeah. No, it resonates with me that whole message, because I know, I know whenever I do reflecting on where I am, where I've come, the lessons that I've learned, there's so much of that getting in your own way, like you say. There's so much of that, your ego blocking you, and this is not, it's not full on egocentric. It just gives you blind spots that you might be attached to an outcome and a way of achieving it, and you just don't let it go, or you have resistance to other things, and it is your own, yourself getting in your own way effectively so much of the time. It's really interesting. Every time I look back, and I will, I will question myself more often now, and try and close the feedback loop of not taking it too long to realize, man, I need to just let go of this. Like there's ways of doing something differently, or it is a very interesting self growth journey.
There is another one,
Why
by
do
the
you
way. So
believe?
there's another.
Sorry,
Sorry, so there's no point there, James, because you just reminded me. There's another great point that says. So let's say it's a chief exec or a leader, and then I say to them, so what does your boss think of you, or what does your chair think of you? And it's invariably the case that they don't really know. They've never sought feedback about how their boss feels about them, or how they feel about leading them. So again, that's another sign that actually they just not aware. And then when they start thinking about it, and I say to them, well, why don't you go and ask them? Well, that's scary, isn't it? Because I might get some negative feedback.
Yeah, for
Why
sure.
would I do that?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. No, interesting. Why do you believe founders need to become better at self-leadership then before expecting it from their teams?
Yeah, I see this a lot with founders, and obviously, we're founders. I see it a lot when they start to grow the business. So we're very good as founders to basically have the ideas, to have the energy, have the purpose, really the enthusiasm to start driving something forward. And then suddenly we get too busy, and we recognize we can't do everything. So we either outsource, to consultants or fractionals or team members or whatever it is. And the problem is that we're still thinking in a way that it's just all about us and we don't necessarily delegate effectively. So founders tend to get it wrong where they still hold on to the things that they're really interested in or they think they're good at, as opposed to becoming the leader first, leading self. So getting out of our own way, role modeling that, ensuring that the people in the business and all the partners and all the different stakeholders are seeing that, and then that in itself lifts the team up to be able to start leading themselves effectively as well. But if actually all we're doing is actually saying to the team, come on, you need to get better, you need to get better, and I'm not changing the way I'm leading them and I'm
Mm.
getting in their way, then it just doesn't work. So again, founders hold their growth back because they're not able to delegate effectively to their teams by letting go of things. So there's lots
Mm.
of other dimensions to that, but that's the main one I see.
Yeah. But yeah, and that's true leadership. It's almost you're leading by example. Leading by example and being the invitation, because then people will be inspired by how you behave as a leader. Other members of your team will be it just find it inspiring, and then they'll be open to figuring out like how are you how are you leading, how are you keeping your mentality so positive or optimistic when challenges are faced and that kind of thing. And yeah, it definitely is that lead by example, self-leading. It makes sense. So when it comes to founders that, might be open to it, you've kind of questioned, or maybe questioning it. What tends to be the self-limiting beliefs that maybe are holding them back? Because it's a big jump to go from, maybe being open to questioning that it is me, and then all the way to like it being like a root cause of like say childhood trauma or something like that. That's a big journey, and it's also really interesting that you do that on your podcast. Like, do you take people through that journey just on a podcast? Does that happen?
It doesn't exactly, because obviously the podcast needs to feel really safe for them. But in terms of
Mm.
the questions we're asking, they're fairly similar. So to answer your question, I find that if we actually get the founder to do an exercise, which is really simple, and everyone listening to this can do this, to answer this question, and the question tends to be, if I as a founder have no limitations whatsoever in terms of financial, health, well-being, family ties, location where I'm going to be, what would I spend the next 10 years doing? Now, that's a really interesting question to answer, because if actually we answer that question and it's exactly what we're doing now, then we're
Mm.
probably not limiting ourselves too much. But if we give an answer which is different to what we're doing now and how we're doing it, what we can then learn is we have a self-limiting belief in a certain area, like, for example, my relationship with money, for example, would be a self-limiting belief in that I always feel that money is scarce. I'm unlikely to invest it before I actually get a return, for example. If
Mm.
I have a problem of relationship with authority, then when I come up against some challenging, stakeholders, the likelihood is I'm going to get defensive and limit myself. So usually asking that question to a founder gets them to understand how they're limiting themselves, because it is only us. It's not money, it's not our location. We could have a chat with our partners about us moving from where we are right now to the other side of the world. But the fact that we don't think we can have those kinds of conversations limits us. So that's what I
Mm.
tend to do. And in a way, that's what the guests come on the show to talk about, recognizing how they were limited, in their early careers, and then how they changed that.
Mm. Yeah, really interesting. And you mentioned you mentioned money is a limitation, beliefs around money, like the scarcity mindset.
Yeah.
Um, is that something that you do? So like flipping into say more abundant, because there are opportunities everywhere when you actually open yourself up to abundance and look at the different ways where you can achieve certain things. Is it scarcity versus abundance? Is that
It
part of it?
is. It is, and it's just a simple question. So if I've got this relationship with scarcity of money, asking the founder the question, who would you be, who could you be if you didn't have that kind of thought process, and that you actually not also just necessarily into abundance, actually spent money differently, who would you be? And we just explore that. We're exploring because they can be anyone they want to be. We can invent ourselves and reinvent ourselves. So it's just putting the thoughts in rather than having these automatic habits we've built up since childhood about the way we relate to various things. And so that curiosity, we've got to have curiosity as founders about what would it be like if I wasn't like that? Could I try it for a week where maybe I just spend a little bit on the credit card, just see what happens? And just testing those things out. And it's not about being reckless and going to buy your new car and let the business go down, but it's just having an iterative thought process about how I might change my behavior.
It's always a nuanced thing. I always struggle with the balance between those kind of things. Like you say, it's not about being reckless. You can't just go buy a brand new car and expect money to just show up, and it doesn't work like that. You do kind of, on a sense, have to have the skills and abilities to make money and sell and all that stuff, business skills. But then there is just that nuanced balance between that and also, and I know this when I'm like heavy on sales and I'm trying to chase outcomes and you're just pushing things further away because you're just in fear and you don't see the easier opportunities that are maybe right in front of you.
I agree.
So it is always interesting. Tell us about your software platform, because you become this like tech enabled coaching company. Tell us more about that, and how's that enabling you to deliver your services better, or how does that work?
So it works on your phone. So at the moment, it's working through Telegram, but it can work through WhatsApp. And basically, it's like having me in your room or in your mind at any time, 24 hours a day. And the way it works is that it can work in two ways. Is that, let's say I'm coaching you and we have a session together of 2 hours. Once we finish the session, you'll have some things that you need to go and work on between now and the time we meet in terms of the next session. And so in between that time, for the next month or whatever it is, you have access to this self-coaching AI platform on Telegram or WhatsApp, and you're basically typing into it or talking into it about what reflections you have that's come up since our meeting, things you're worried about, things you're working on, and the way it responds to you is the way that I would respond to you in terms of getting you to think, getting you to reflect. It's having a conversation with you. Of course, I'm not there in the background typing. It's an AI tool that actually is programmed with my tone, with my particular methodologies. And so therefore, you've got me with you 24 hours a day. So the way that that's used is either in between sessions with clients that are paying me to coach them, or let's say we've got founders, and there are many of them out there listening to this, who can't afford to employ a coach. It's a lot of money sometimes to employ a coach, and depending where we are in our cycle, the cash flow doesn't work. What we can do is use the AI coach in the Telegram at a very low cost. It's about sort of 25 euros a month, something like that, for you to be able to then access me on the phone without having to pay to obviously come and see me face to face. Now, the reason that works is because once you start getting into how a coach would work with you in terms of getting into reflective practice, you will still come up with some of those really big bumps in the road where there's a pattern that I need some help with this. And I might then need to go and get a session with the coach. So it's almost like a triage system in that way, but it helps every single day. And for the 25 euros a month that people pay for it, it's really good value. So both of those are great, and it allows me to access more people in terms of them benefiting from coaching. And that's where AI is really making a difference in terms of just increasing the volume of people that can learn how to coach themselves.
Yeah, and I'm assuming it's you've got sort of a proprietary, unique methodology to your coaching that you then you've then developed that into software. So there are, to an extent, parts of it that are replicable that can be done by AI, and then it comes back to
Yeah, so
yeah.
the difference is a really good question. Is the actual way it interacts with you is the way that probably any AI coach would work with you, in the sense of it asks the right questions at the right time and gets you to reflect, because it never gives you the answer, because that's not coaching, that's mentoring. And both are valid, by the way, but I'm talking about coaching. But the most important thing is, because it's populated with my self-coaching methodologies, which is my IP, that's the kind of structure and framework you would get to take you through that journey. And that's a differentiator. Yes, there's lots of AI coaches out there you could work with.
Yeah, interesting. Excuse me. You've scaled your business through, as we spoke about, those partnerships. you've made associates globally, right? I think that you mentioned that. So, what are the biggest lessons from building that partnership-based model, building a lean, high leverage business through those partnerships rather than an internal team? What are some of the big lessons and insights from that?
So I've learned the hard way. The way I tried to do it originally was formally, contractually, around what we had in common in terms of the kind of clients we were in service of. And I did that for the first 2 years. And to be quite honest, it didn't really work. What I
Mm.
then did was started to change it, and it did work and is working. And I'm sure many of the people listening to this would understand the term community of practice. And what that is a community of practice is like-minded individuals who are servicing similar clients, but operate in a certain way with a certain value set, i.e., sharing, free information to each other, collaboration. We're actually trying to be in service of each other as well as the client, and we meet up regularly. Has really worked because we've actually, without any contractual arrangements, we've just let things emerge in terms of what's right for the client. So it's much more loose. We actually agree what the contractual terms are when we've got the client in front of us and what their requirement is. And we have an adult conversation about what that looks like in terms of the commercial sort of remuneration around that. And I found that works much better because we're doing it around values and trust as opposed to contractually what we're obliged to do for a particular client. And so we've done that internationally, both in terms of coaches that work with us, partners in executive search, partners in assessment techniques, training, doesn't matter. But what it means is the client can get access to those particular individuals at any time if they're going through me or indeed my associates. So that's been the learning. Do it through what feels right, gut, trust, but also in terms of that value we provide each other.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That really resonates then. So the values and trust, alignment, and then you're not you kind of build you're trying to build sort of win-win systems, win-win for everybody that's in complete alignment with what everybody wants when it comes to their own values and outcomes, and it makes a lot of sense. It's really interesting. You've okay, so you also mentioned that many of your clients need an event to be ready, to receive the coaching that you do. Um, what are some of those common triggers? You kind of mentioned like the scarcity, abundance of a money limitations, but what are the common triggers for founders that that then triggers that then signals that they are ready for your coaching?
Yeah. So there are usually two or three things that are common amongst most founders. So the first one is, and we never want to see this, but there's a breakdown in a key relationship. So it might be, a partner at home, it might be a partner in the business, it might be an investor, it might be a key customer, but there's something that happens which is seismic, which completely changes the perception of the founder, and they might be open to the fact that they're part of the problem. So that's the first thing that happens where there's an event. The second thing is something around health or personal well-being. So this could be burnout. It could be that we actually have become unhealthy because of the way we're eating or we're too immobile. But whatever it is, we recognize that something's happening to us, our body, our physical being and our emotional being, that's being contributed by the way we're being in terms of relation to our business. And an event happens like that, which usually puts us out of action for maybe a week or two or three, or sometimes we have a serious health condition. We can still function, we can still be the founder, but it really knocks us back. So that's the second thing. And then the third thing that tends to happen is where there's an environmental context. So it might be a whole market, suddenly collapses. We had this during COVID, didn't we? It might be that, something that we were doing is now being done by a system and process and suddenly means we can't add value anymore in that. So there's a big event in the environment, in the value chain, which allows us to actually think again, how do we need to show up with this? And if I've got a lot of expertise in that or a lot of knowledge in that sector, again, it can be quite difficult. So I need to reinvent myself. So we never want these events to happen, but sometimes they do. And at that point, they look down and say, could it be me and the way I'm actually showing up with this? I might need some help.
Yeah, very interesting. And so when in your own business growth and client acquisition, how do you have these people coming to you with those series that those events that happen? How does that work? What works well for you in building the awareness in marketing and however you grow?
So I think that's changed over time, but I'll tell you what's worked and where it is going right now. So ever since 2017, when I set the business up, because of who I was and what I did, I decided that for me, education was going to be the biggest way of informing people out there of what I did, so they would know when they're ready if I was the right person for them or not. I actually, produced a lot of content. I went onto LinkedIn. I was one of the first members on LinkedIn. I've got about 23,000 followers on there now. So on there every single day, I'm putting content for free, which is educational and it's informal. And it allows people who might be my clients to actually resonate with some of the topics and actually say, oh, that could be me, or I might need to think about that. So that's how it started early. How it's evolving is through the podcast, which you mentioned, which is actually having guests on the show who some of them are my clients or could be my clients. Some have got their own coaches because of what they're going through. So again, there's expertise built up in that. So there's this, being the expert around that topic, even though I don't do all the talking on it, they do. And then the third thing has been in terms of me being a bit braver in terms of actually doing some stuff to camera. So something like this, where I'm doing, YouTube uploads each day around the thought for the day, and just connecting again in terms of video format with people who are on there scrolling on their reel, suddenly come across something over 30 seconds which hits them that's relevant. So the problem with my business, like a lot of businesses out there, I never really know when the CEO or the founder is going to be ready to work with me, and therefore these triggers remind them, oh, yeah, I remember that. I'm feeling like that. I might need to go and speak to Andrew now. So most of the people that come to me know of me. It's never really cold.
Yeah.
Some of them I've never really necessarily had a relationship with, but actually more and more my clients now I had a relationship with maybe 3 to 5 years ago through LinkedIn or corresponding, and they come to me later when they're ready. So that's the way it tends to work.
Yeah, and that makes complete sense because it's such a timing thing, that it's all about the timing. So it's like if you're out there talking about certain things, it's almost like tuning into when you've got a radio station and you're not really listening, but then something comes on that's super relevant. You enter the conversation going on in your prospect's mind, and then that might take them down that path to actually wanting to find out more, for example. So yeah, it
There
makes
is one
perfect
point on
sense.
that actually, James. It's really important probably for the audience. It took me a long time, but I know a lot of people out there would have heard this term of ideal client profile. And I didn't really get that right to start with. I was probably too broad, and it maybe took me 2 years to really focus in on the CEO or the founder of a business that was going on this journey and needed to have that recognition that I needed some help. So that took me a good 2 years to really qualify that. But now it's really clear for me, and they're the people I'm speaking to, and they're the only people that I work with. So yeah, but it took a couple of years to button that down.
Yeah. So if it's the founder, what was it before? Were you just very broad and general?
I guess it were people that felt the same way, but they were
Okay.
leaders generally,
Yeah.
and what I decided was if I was going to make the maximum impact in terms of my work, I better work with the people who could make the maximum impact in terms of their business, their markets, which is why and also they had the purse strings, right? So they could decide immediately about whether they were going to work with me rather than having to check with a CEO. So those two things mainly, changed that direction after 2 years.
Yeah, makes sense. You also mentioned CHRO just at the beginning of this conversation. What's the involvement of the CHRO?
Yeah, and it's really interesting the evolving CHR role because what I do in terms of leadership development coaching, the human centric piece, obviously is owned by HR in medium sized and larger organizations. But what I've tend to found over the years is that HR find it very, very challenging to convince CEOs to spend money in these areas, and therefore I just learned that I needed to engage with CEO. I'm always very happy to deal with the HR director on invitation from the CEO, but I just find for both of us, it's far better if the CEO's engaged and bought in and already signed off what it is we're doing, and then we have the relationship. But I just found, particularly during COVID, going in through HR first just didn't serve me because quite rightly, they wanted to have a lot of options on the bench, and I didn't even know if the decision had been made. So I still engage, it's still very important in what I do, but I don't go to them first.
Was it so? So you mentioned 2 years being broad and then bringing was it almost? Did it just click when you started doing that and targeting, the people that make the decisions, ultimately the CEOs? Was it a huge change for you?
Well, I was coached. So, I would say that,
Okay.
wouldn't I? So I was starting with what I'd said and then feeling as though it wasn't necessarily adding as much value. So I employed a coach to work with me. He was more of a business coach. It
Mm.
wasn't about me necessarily getting my own way. I just needed some support about really honing it down. And it was in that partnership where we came together over those 3 months and just decided that's where I needed to really focus. And it felt right for me. And then
Mm.
all the material, all the content, is all aligned to that. That's why I enjoy speaking about.
Yeah. When it comes to growth right now, what's the biggest challenge? What's maybe not working at the level it could or should?
I think there are three things here, and I'm sure that people relate to this. So the first is what we've already talked about. It's about it's getting better at understanding what signals are out there in terms of the people that already know me about when they're ready to engage. So that's the
Hmm.
biggest challenge. And there's so much software out there now that promises all this. I'm sure it'll get better. But even through timeliness of all the information we give, we can tell how people are responding. So that's the biggest challenge. How can we do that more efficiently? The second is, which is really interesting, bear in mind my first comment about not wanting to build a team, is as I build out the business now to become bigger and bigger, I'm having to start thinking about where can AI replace some of the things that have been done by people in the past in my network. And there are many ways that can be done, around process systems. So that's the biggest challenge. There's so much stuff out there. How do I actually choose the right things to part with, almost like a fractional AI member of the team, to be able to support me in the right way without necessarily affecting the reputation of the business and making sure it works well. So that's the second thing. And then the third thing, and you'd expect me to say this, is me. Of course it's me. So I get in my own way, and sometimes that's because maybe I'm not being as aspirational as I could be in terms of the targets we're going for. It might be I'm sometimes getting my own way because I'm thinking that maybe a partner isn't maybe trusting me as much, and it's all down to me. So I think that's a third way which I'm always working on in terms of growth, and it is always as the self-limiting.
Mm. Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, I like how you put that because it's again, it comes back to the point that I was making. It's the balance between, I genuinely believe that's true for all founders and including myself. Is it's that outer world does follow the inner world when it comes to self-limiting beliefs and getting in your own way around opportunities that might be there or relationships or authentic conversations you need to have with people. Um, so that is always a part of it. And then it is finding that balance between that and, the actual business aspect to growth. What's the goal over the next sort of 12 months or so in terms of growth?
Well, for me, I have got high aspirations now. So we really want to get access to as many leaders as possible in terms of the self-coaching piece. So we're aiming for 1 million, which is a lot of people, but we've now got some really early contracts and targets coming to light there. So, and that'll be global in that sense. The second is a personal target for me in terms of the work-life balance. So I've got 2 grandchildren now, who I saw this morning, and I see them every Thursday morning. So I want to make sure, back to your point, I want to make sure that I'm still putting enough time into the business, but I'm still having the balance for time for me to make sure that I'm looking after myself from a well-being perspective. So I've probably dipped on that a little bit this year so far. So by the end of the year, next 12 months, I want to make sure that I'm carving out that time for me. And then the third thing really is obviously around the revenues of the business as well. So because of AI, it's so great out there. You see now, isn't it? It hasn't been done yet, but the first solopreneur unicorn, is being predicted in terms of a business that grows without necessarily employing people. It's creating value in terms of what it provides to its clients. And so for me, that's a really interesting topic area. And I want to, double the size of our business over the next 12 months by utilizing AI in that sense. So personal revenue targets, personal targets around my own space, but also making sure we're serving, over 1 million people in terms of what we do.
Yeah, that's a bit. I mean, they're very aspirational, big goals. You said before, maybe sometimes you're getting in your own way when it comes to aspirational, but that's they're big aspirational goals to be very excited for. So, really cool. What do you see as some potential roadblocks, obstacles that could be getting in the way of those growth projections?
All of them come back to me. So the first element around the 1 million, that's me having enough bandwidth to select the right partners and continue the right partners, because the only way we're going to do that is if we're getting very large corporates really bought into what we do. And when we're working with very large corporates, it takes time. and I'm
Mm.
not the most patient of individuals when I'm dealing with larger corporates, even though I can see the benefit for them. So I think that's going to be
Mm.
the first thing that could get in the way. I've got to have patience for that. Or I actually work with partners who love doing that kind of work and they benefit in some way commercially from me working alongside them. So that's one thing I'm working on now. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing about the balance, of course, as the business grows, there's always that temptation to get involved in things that are really interesting. I'm worse for AI. I've just come off doing a webinar, I think I told you, around AI. I'm really interested in it, but really, as a founder of the company, should I really be spending time in that, even though it interests me? Should I be watching,
Mm.
videos on this? So I think that's really important around work-life balance. I've got to stick to what I need to do. There's a great book I'll share with the audience called Essentialism by Greg McKeown, Mckeown, and it talks about all of us out there doing the essential and not the stuff that we like to do, think we should do, or that people think we should do. There's only usually 7 or 8 things as leaders that we should do that are essential for us to do to be successful. So for me, it's really focusing on those and what they are and just doing them as opposed to other things. And then the third area around the revenue growth, my strength is sales, so when I'm in front of people like founders or CEOs who have that nagging thought, I'm usually pretty good at converting them. So the only thing that's going to get in the way of the revenue growth is if I don't create the time to be with clients, to understand the accounts that can grow the self-coaching piece. So I've got to make sure I'm still in that space, when I need to be, as opposed to getting bogged down in other things around the business.
Mm. Yeah, and as that as that sort of leader, the head coach in the business that understands that, you've got that depth of expertise when you're talking to clients. Do you ever delegate the sales side out to other people, or has that
It's only
ever
It's only
happened?
partners, yeah. So I wouldn't say it's
Yeah.
delegated. I'd say it's partners, as we discussed before. So we have people who are operating under the franchise or sometimes under their brand, licensing. So yeah, it's partners who I trust who will do that, and we work together on that when they need me. Sometimes they just use our IP and they use it in their own business, which is fine too. So yeah, it's more partners around. Where the delegation comes is in AI. So I'm delegating a lot more of my process of selling into AI processes.
Mm. Yeah. No, and I'm right there with you when it comes to AI, because it's very exciting, especially for a visionary entrepreneur that's full of ideas that you can see how they could be implemented. It's very hard to navigate right now, not getting too shiny object syndrome about this technology, and just like you say, sticking to the essentials, the essentialism, that things that are really going to move the needle, that are going to
I
make
mean,
all the difference right now.
I'll tell you who my next appointment probably will be. I was thinking about this last week as I was reflecting, and again, the audience might reflect on this, but and I don't know where they are, where they exist, but for me, I probably need to bring into the business now a fractional AI officer. I need to bring
Mm.
that person that's working with me for how many ever days it is a month, where they're advising me on the best ways to move my business forward to those goals with using it, as
Mm.
opposed to me having to try and work it out myself. So I'm sure there are many people out there, that do that now, and I see it as a whole new area. But that's probably my next appointment.
Yeah. Yeah, makes sense. What's your biggest frustration right now? What keeps you awake at night?
I think it's the state of leadership around the world at the moment, and
Okay.
I think the fact that if you are somewhere between, uh, let's go with sort of psychopathic and narcissistic, in terms of a leader, you seem to being rewarded at the moment around the world, because you're leading in that way. And that doesn't mean you're always necessarily a bad leader, but because you can get things done, but it's the way in which it's done. And I think the world needs much more compassionate leadership, much more conscious leadership, much more leadership focused on leading self, as opposed to using the ego and selfishly thinking about what I can get out of this as a leader, which is what a lot of egocentric leaders do. So I think that's the biggest frustration for 2 reasons. One, I think the world deserves better. And let's face it, in politics, we vote for these people. But secondly, I also think that in terms of the way that more impact can be made in the world, the kind of leadership that I am passionate about and see every single day is much more effective and can actually benefit more people. So I think that's the frustration, that not more people are necessarily following the type of leaders that I really respect. And I can't do anything about that in the short term. All I can do is teach more people that want to learn how they can become more effective themselves.
Mm. Who are some leaders that you find incredibly inspiring that maybe people will know?
Yeah, I think there's some really interesting ones here. So, and I always get the names wrong, so forgive me. But the previous New Zealand Prime Minister was Arla Ahern.
Okay.
Yeah, so she, for me, had compassionate leadership during COVID. She was very honest when she stepped down from that role, saying she was burnt out. She
Mm.
basically couldn't do the role anymore. So she led through a very tough time and showed compassion and kindness for a lot of people, and yet was still deemed as a good leader. If you go to the other extreme, and not everyone's going to say, I'm a Man United fan, by the way, so unfortunately, bad times for us at the moment. But if you look at Alex Ferguson, for example, in his era, even though he seemed quite scary to a lot of people, one-on-one, in terms of a leader, when he was managing that football club, people really respected him because of his passion and because of his clarity of thought, because of his vision, and because of the way he held people to account. So that's a different form of leadership, which still
Mm.
wasn't really narcissistic or psychopathic. So they're two that immediately come to mind. And then there's leaders I meet every day, in my work, who are the ones that actually are really kind to themselves. They are people who look after themselves, recognizing the oxygen mask analogy, that if they do that, they can be in service of more people. So it's not the people that are always making personal sacrifices and, feeling as though it's hard work all the time. It doesn't need to be like that. We can lead ourselves and be kind to ourselves and still be very effective at what we do.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's a lot easier said than done because of just this, just the stress that you place on yourself as a leader and the expectations that you maybe. But this is all internal, it's all the meaning that you attach for sure. So it's very interesting, an interesting topic, and interesting, to really delve into that inner world and see what's going on and uncover subconscious beliefs and narratives, and very fascinating. And for founders listening, to this who know they're maybe stuck in their own way, but they're not sure where to start, what advice would you give to them?
People aren't going to like this, but the best advice I can give, which has really benefited me, and I'm sure has benefited you in the past when you've done it, is where you are right now in terms of the journey you're on as a founder. Just create some space and time for yourself just to reflect on what is going on. Don't just keep doing. Take the time out, meet somebody who you really trust and respect, who you can really have a good open conversation with, where they're going to listen to you and not try and challenge you or correct you, just to be listened to, because that in itself will allow you to work out what it is that you need to do next. If we keep on
Mm.
doing all the things we've been doing without that space. So I think that's the important thing. And of course, it leads to, as you know what I'm going to say, if we have that space to reflect, we might have that little thing that goes on in our head that goes, you know what, it might be me. And then we're really onto something that's really insightful. And then we can actually change our lives.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. I love that, and I know from personal experience that that's very true. It's very true. Everything you just said. It's having it's either getting into your own space and maybe journaling and having those reflection questions, or it is confiding in somebody that is just gonna hear you, see you, you communicate, and that's allowing yourself to ruminate, express, and yeah, it uncovers pretty amazing things when you can find the time to do that.
When you create the
Yeah,
time to
well,
do that, not will find you've got to create the time.
yeah, good point. Yeah, so I really appreciate this conversation. It's really fascinating to always talk about this stuff. So, for founders listening, where can people find out more? Find out more about you and the work that you do.
So the easiest place is if you just go onto LinkedIn and type Andrew Tallents. Unbelievably, there's only one of me. So I can't believe that, but there is one of me. So you'll find me easily on there. Or on there, you'll see all my content. My website is deadeasyandrewtallents.com. You'll see all the things we do on there. And my YouTube channel is Andrew Tallents, and you can find all the Confessions of a Successful Leader podcast on there as well. And if people want to email me, they'll find my email address on the actual website itself, and they'll message me on LinkedIn. But it'd be lovely to hear from those people that are listening to this and have been touched in some way or just curious about, is it them?
Mm. Amazing. And I'll make sure I put the links in the description below as well. And yeah, again, Andrew, really appreciate you coming on and having this conversation. And I'll be watching the growth of Andrew Tallents and your partners and your company and the AI software that you've got going. I'll be watching it all with great interest.
Thanks, James, and thanks for hosting. I really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot.